In One Piece Film Red, we saw something we'd never seen before in the series: demons. The movie revealed that there are actual demons hidden in the One Piece world, and even more interestingly, that these demons were born out of people's negative emotions.
An entity from ancient times created from human emotions. Loneliness, sadness, the shadows that fall on the soul. They called it the King of Demons. According to the records, when the Demon King is summoned, it will appear in 2 places at once. One here, in the world created by the Sing Sing fruit, and the other in reality. Although this may not be the intent, the demon acts as a link between worlds.
Since the One Piece movies are considered not to be canon, however, this revelation didn't get much of a fan reaction when Film Red came out. But recently, things have changed, and the latest chapter of the One Piece manga may have forced us to rethink the importance of the One Piece movies. In chapter 1142, we see what appear to be demons, which, just like in Film Red, were brought to the world from people's negative emotions. These monsters we've now seen on Elbaf were all based on the nightmares of children, and they also resemble those seen in Film Red. If this is indeed a concept that was first introduced in a movie, and only then brought over to the manga, what should be noted is that this would not be the first time something like this has happened in One Piece. The latest chapter is only one among now many cases in the final saga, where the manga has taken something from the movies and made it a part of the canon story. And this latest chapter is not even the first time this has happened during Elbaf. This all makes you ask the question: are the One Piece movies all of a sudden canon? One of the big things introduced in the final saga is Shanks' biological family, which is the celestial dragon Figarland family. Yet the first mention of this family did not actually come from the manga. This is once again something first brought up in Film Red, where the Gorosei are seen talking about the Figarlands being Shanks' family, long before they were ever brought up in the canon story. On top of this, the main villain of Film Red, Uta, was herself also shown in a manga chapter, where we see Shanks thinking about her. Film Red is however hardly the only One Piece movie connected to the canon story. At the beginning of the current Elbaf arc, we got our first look at Elbaf's wildlife. Except that it actually wasn't our first look, where Elbaf's creatures were actually introduced years ago in One Piece film Strong World. This was also not the only element of Strong World that was recently made canon, where Oda also in an SBS revealed that Shiki's devil fruit, which we'd only seen in the movie, is also in fact his canon fruit. With so many things that were shown first in movies later being introduced in the manga, does this then mean that everything in the movies is canon? To be frank, the answer to this question is a very definitive no. It is basically impossible for the events of the movies to have actually happened in the story, and this is simply due to the timeline. If we take Strong World for example, the movie is supposedly set in the time between the Thriller Bark and Sabaody arcs, but this alone should make the events of the movie impossible. This is because Brook at the beginning of Sabaody says that it is his first time fighting as a member of the Straw Hat Pirates. Unless Brook had a sudden case of amnesia, this confirms that he didn't have an extra adventure with the Straw Hats between these 2 arcs, which in short means that Strong World did not happen in the actual story. This is however nothing compared to the later movies, where literally dozens of characters are seen taking part in events that completely break the timeline of the canon One Piece story. So, if the movies can't have possibly happened, yet details from the movies are frequently brought over to the canon story, where do we draw the line in what's canon and what's not canon? I actually think the answer to this question comes from Oda himself. In the earlier SBS where Oda revealed that Shiki's devil fruit was canon, Oda also said that he didn't actually consider the events of the movies to be connected to the manga, and that the only reason why Shiki's devil fruit was now canon was because Shiki himself had been a canon character even before film Strong World. I think this is essentially how this all works, where the movies themselves are not canon, but they can still introduce elements of the canon story. Even if Film Red first introduced things like the Figarland family, Uta and demons, and these were later seen in the actual story, this is essentially the movies giving fans a preview of what is to come in the manga. Oda works very closely with different One Piece projects, and he sometimes shares future story details with these projects. This is also something that has been happening even before the final saga. A huge example is the fact that Raftail, being spelled as Laugh Tail, was first revealed in the movie Stampede. but there's also smaller examples, such as characters like Chaton and Momosaki having their designs first revealed in film Go. My 2 cents is that this is all just marketing, where these kinds of small details being dropped in the movies are meant to create discussion and make fans who are mainly just interested in the canon story want to see the films. While Oda says that the One Piece character he is personally the most similar to is Shanks, in reality, it's better to think of Oda as Big News Morgans, where the man is not just a storyteller, he is also a huge salesman. Like it or not, this marketing strategy also clearly works, and we'll probably see more and more One Piece canon material first revealed in things like movies in the future. To tie this all back to the creatures we've now seen on Elbaf, unlike in film Red, we are in the manga given an actual explanation behind these monsters, where they were created by the gods' knights. More specifically, the character behind these demons is seemingly Giringam, as he's very tired after these monsters appeared. Giringam being behind the monsters is in my opinion incredibly interesting, where he has seemingly eaten a mythical Gilin Soan fruit. Yet from my understanding, none of the mythical powers of a Gilin actually involve dreams. I think this may be a hint that just like in film Red, these demons could be actual demons, and not just illusions made with devil fruit powers. This may also be hinted at by the fact that the demons seem to have an actual physical form, where the snake we see in the beginning of the chapter is able to chew up wood, and it doesn't just vanish after it takes damage. If these monsters are genuine living beings brought to life from children's dreams, it could be another big hint that the celestial dragons are in possession of special powers even beyond devil fruits. The celestial dragons have now been able to perform so many special abilities that don't fit anywhere in the established One Piece power system, like regeneration, extended lifespans, telepathy, and teleportation. If Saturn's death scene is any evidence, the celestial dragon's special powers have all seemingly been granted to them by Imu. What this could mean is that the dream manipulation ability we've now seen on Elbaf is also something that comes from Imu. If true, it would further prove that Imu is a character who pretty much breaks all the rules of the One Piece story, where he is somehow in possession of a huge arsenal of special powers, and he is also able to grant these powers to any other character. I've seen a lot of speculation in the fandom that this is the introduction of a new power system to the One Piece story, where Imu is in fact not a devil fruit user, but is himself some kind of demon with a wholly unique set of abilities. I don't personally have a problem with this idea, and I've also made my own videos about why Hell could be an actual dimension in the One Piece world connected to Imu. Still, I'm not fully ready to commit to the idea of Imu not being human just yet. What I really like about One Piece is that all the characters at the end of the day are just people, where even godlike beings like Enel and the Five Elders turn out to just be dudes with supernatural powers. Essentially, there are no literal gods or demons in this story, but simply characters playing within the supernatural rules of this world. And I think this could still be the explanation behind Imu. If Imu has indeed been alive since the Void Century, it's possible that all his special powers are simply explained by experience. He's had potentially hundreds of years to train his devil fruit, which means that Imu could have simply unlocked far more potential out of his fruit than any other character in history, possibly explaining why his powers appear to break many of the story's conventions. While this is a more simple explanation, it would be more in line with the Smoke and Mirrors theme of the One Piece story. We actually see this theme again in this chapter, where even though what is happening on Elbaf at a first glance seems completely bizarre and out of this world, it's very clearly just a trick made by the gods' knights to distract the giants. When the kids are sleepwalking in line out of the school, they are literally being directed by an arrow, which is clearly Kunko using her devil fruit ability to move the kids. I also think the kids having suddenly fallen asleep could be explained by something as simple as sleeping gas, which is something that exists in the story, and we've seen it in arcs like Whiskey Peak and Punk Hazard. Now that I think about it, this could actually be the reason why Giringam is so tired. Since he literally wears a gas mask, it could be that it was his job to make the kids fall asleep with gas, and maybe he accidentally ended up inhaling some of the gas himself. I suppose this opens up the possibility that much of what I've spoken in this video is actually false. Maybe these monsters are just a regular devil fruit creation, and it was in fact another god's knight, like Somers or Shamrock, who is behind these nightmares coming to life using their fruit. We actually do not see Shamrock with the other knights in this chapter, and while it's possible he already returned to the Holy Land, I personally think he is still on the island. Shamrock was downright gleeful at the idea of putting the giants through this game, so I think he would want to personally witness it. More importantly, Shamrock earlier in the arc personally declared that he'd subjugate the giants for the world government. It would be a bit weird if he immediately left at the very first opportunity after making such a declaration, as Shamrock doesn't strike me as someone who'd like leaving a job unfinished. There's also just the overall story to consider, where I don't think Shamrock has yet left a strong enough impression on the reader. Shamrock is clearly going to be a huge player in the final saga, and I think this arc is pretty much his Aokichi or Kizaru moment, where he gets introduced and we get a hint of how powerful of an enemy he will be in the future, but I just don't think Shamrock has shown enough of his strength yet. With Aokichi and Kizaru, it wasn't that we just saw what their abilities were, we also saw their powers in practice, and I'm pretty sure we'll also see this from Shamrock before he leaves Elbaf. Saint Summer says that they are directing the kids toward a ship, and because the God's Knights all came to the island through the magic circles, I'd assume that this means they have now captured one of the giants' vessels. I suppose since Shamrock wasn't shown in this chapter, this ship could be where he is at the moment. The nightmares the kids experience may have actually been a very discreet case of foreshadowing, where they mention a lot of the mythical beings the giants believe in, like Fenrir, Jormungandr, and Roger, all of which are from real-life Norse mythology. Since this is One Piece, some or all of these creatures could later be revealed to have their own devil fruits. The kids also mention Nika, but their depiction is very different from the white warrior we've seen before, where the kid's drawing is actually black with fiery hair. I think this ties to what the Elbaf arc has so far said about sun god Nika, where he's believed to just as well be an ancient of destruction, as he's a warrior of liberation. This might connect to something I discussed in my breakdown of chapter 1140, where Kaban specifically noted Luffy transforming into a white form. I speculated that this may be the story setting up an alternative transformation to Nika's awakening, rather than the white form we've seen so far. This has arguably been hinted at even before this chapter, where many of the images we've seen of Nika, including Joy Boy's transformation, were silhouetted, meaning that they were possibly not actually white like Luffy in Gear 5. An alternative theory is that the color of the awakening is connected to the personality of the user, where those who bring about liberation turn white, while those that favor destruction turn black. I suppose this could mean that the Nika user who possibly appeared in the first world was the latter, and was actually black instead of white, possibly explaining why some view Nika as a destroyer. If you want an even wilder theory, maybe Joy Boy himself did not actually use the white form, where there's already been a few hints in the story that him and the Ancient Kingdom may not have been the most morally sound people. To me, it is also impossible not to think of Lunarians when seeing this depiction of Nika, where just like someone like King, it is a figure clad in black, with flames at its back. One of the kids also saw a nightmare of Loki, and this is really interesting, as Loki is not actually a mythical creature, but a genuine person. This could mean that Loki's reputation on Elbaf is at this point so bad that the younger generation do not even think of him as a person, but as an actual mythical villain. This may actually be a good topic to turn into a future video, where this could be an example of how a lot of devil fruits are born into the One Piece world. Vegapunk himself said that all devil fruits are based on people's desires, and these desires could have all once been inspired by something from reality. Beings like Nika that later became devil fruits in the story may have once just been people, but their deeds eventually became legends and things present in people's dreams. So, if Loki's reputation already goes this deep in Elbaf, on paper, there could eventually be a literal Loki devil fruit in the world of One Piece, based on the giant's dreams of him. We may have also gotten another hint about a character this could happen to. One of the nightmares shown on the last page looks pretty much exactly like Big Mom, and it makes a whole lot of sense that the Elbaf's kids would have nightmares of her, where the giants have now treated Big Mom as a demon for over 60 years. What I'm getting at here is that because of Elbaf's propaganda, the One Piece world may not only end up birthing a Loki devil fruit, but also a Big Mom devil fruit. May God help us all. The real Loki also gets a scene in this chapter, where he's actually able to emit lightning from his Ragnir hammer. My first thought was that, just like Shamrock's sword, Loki's weapon has also eaten a devil food, though there are other explanations too, such as the hammer being possibly mounted with thunder dials, like the ones we saw on Skypiea. If we go with the devil food idea though, the first option would very likely be that the hammer has consumed a Thor sown fruit. This could certainly be cool, and the idea of Loki literally wielding Thor as a weapon is also pretty funny. If you want a more random idea, it could be that the hammer has instead eaten a mink sown fruit, and Loki with it is able to perform Electro. Loki is also not the only guy wielding a hammer on Elbaf, where this chapter also introduced us to Kiba, the principal of the Giant School, who's the former member of the Giant Warrior Pirates. Since Kiba is clearly very old, I'd assume that he's from the older generation of Giant Warrior Pirates, and that he was on the same ship as Yorl and Jarl, possibly making him hundreds of years old, and one of the oldest living characters in all of One Piece. Kiba also looks extremely similar to a walrus, with his tusks and whiskers, so maybe he too has eaten a sown devil food. Though frankly, some One Piece characters are just weird like this, where they have animalistic features without any explanation. Kiba and Sol were also not the only ones going ham in this chapter, where Yamato in the cover story also attacks Who's Who with a Thunder Bagua. It's actually really interesting to see if Who's Who gets up from this attack. Yamato is super strong, and for example managed to knock out Ulti with this same attack during the Onigashima raid. And this was when Yamato still had Sea Stone cups on, and Yamato has since then likely gotten a lot stronger from fighting characters like Kaido and Green Bull. So, just saying, Jinbei managed to take out Who's Who with a few attacks while he was in his hybrid form, so if Yamato can't bring Who's Who down with a sneak attack Thunder Bagua, you better start keeping an eye on Jinbei, where he to this day may have not yet shown his full power, though I personally think it's more likely that Yamato just knocked Who's Who out cold. Ahoy matey, this channel has recently plundered the most valuable ship on the Seven Seas, which be the viewership. These be the wretched dogs who've fallen to me blade. Mardiana Tanita, Thomas Johnson, Joshua Ann, and the most vile rogue on these waters. Watching Higurashi at 12 gave me psychosis. Methinks you'll soon be joining these scoundrels in the brig. Basically, if you want to give extra support to the channel, definitely check out the membership feature. Thank you to all the current members. I'm still trying to make these outros more interesting, but I clearly need more practice. As always, thank you for watching this video to the end.